There is an ideological battle going on between two generations that sometimes seem diametrically opposed. Our next guest, Joseph Sternberg, argues millennials and baby boomers are talking past each other. Millennials say they're in a bind. The economy has never quite worked for us. We're straddled with student debt and can't afford to buy a home. And baby boomers' response?
Okay, Lauren, I'll play the role even though I'm solidly a Gen Xer. Here we go. What are you kids complaining about? We live at a time when America has never been so prosperous. You have Google to do your homework for you. You have Uber to hail a cab for you before you even have to step out in the rain. Life isn't so bad.
That was convincing, Mark.
Thank
Okay.
you.
So Sternberg, a millennial himself and editorial page editor for the Wall Street Journal's European edition, wanted to know who was right. That's what he tackles in his new book, The Theft of a Decade, How the Baby Boomers Stole the Millennials' Economic Future. And I think by that title, you can probably guess what side he came down on. He says the Great Recession is at the root of a lot of this. I spoke with him via Skype.
Well, the key thing has to do with age, actually. In fact, age more than some hazy notion of generations having a lot in common with each other just because they were born at the same time. I mean, the one thing that all millennials, who are a pretty diverse bunch, do have in common with each other is our age. The oldest of us were born in 81, 82. I'm a child of 82 myself. The youngest were born in 1996. And so that means that we were the people who were entering the labor market for the first time during and immediately after the Great Recession. And that dynamic is the heart of my book. Talking about how if you were a young person, you're always more vulnerable to the effects of a downturn. Especially a downturn as severe and in some ways unusual as the Great Recession disproportionately affected younger people. Job losses were concentrated in a lot of the smaller companies where younger people traditionally find more job opportunities. The effects of the housing market have created real problems for millennials right at the age when we should be buying into the market for the first time. And of course, all of those effects also drove us into higher education in larger numbers at a time when it's never been as expensive as it is now. And that really is the origin of a lot of the student debt crisis.
I'm probably a good example of this. I graduated college in 2009, so right after the recession hit, essentially. And instead of getting a job, therefore, I went to grad school, right? So a lot of this, you also talk about student debt.
Yes, and I mean, that is a classic story that you hear from millennials, and I think it's a big part of the theft of a decade they talk about, the extent to which millennials were really told that pursuing higher education was an investment that would always pay off in the end. The one investment in human history where you would always get a profitable return from it. Boomers really persuaded us, convinced us, their children, that you needed to get that college degree or that graduate degree to have job security, but it hasn't worked out that way. In part because the job market took such a long time to recover after the Great Recession, you had people taking on these huge quantities of student debt, hoping that that was going to make the labor market work for us in the end. And then it didn't. And what you're left with is the student debt without the job that pays you the wage that allows you to repay the loan.
What were the policy decisions that went into this as our leaders in Congress at the time when the recession hit decided how to get out of it? Like you say they made some key decisions that have led to this.
A good example is in the housing market itself. So, one of the things that actually contributed to the financial crisis in the end was the fact that the boomers had so aggressively pursued government policies that were supposed to boost the home ownership rate. Boomers were absolutely convinced that this was the only reliable path into the middle class. That created a lot of subsidy programs for mortgages. It pushed a lot of people who probably shouldn't have been taking on the burden of a mortgage into home ownership. But it also created a lot of financial instability that ultimately led to the housing bust in the Great Recession. The boomer response after that was to double down on it. And you had a lot of policies from the Federal Reserve that were oriented toward trying to reinflate the housing market, even though by that point the crash was evidence that it hadn't been sustainable before. You have just all of these policies in the housing market that have been oriented toward trying to keep boomers in particular in their homes as long as possible, without really thinking about what that means for millennials who should be able to buy into the market but find that they can't because the prices are artificially high. And boomers are staying in these houses for too long.
I remember taking a class in college called Early Upward American Mobility, where you looked at people like, John Smith and Benjamin Franklin and Louisa May Alcott and all of these voices that sort of shaped the American narrative about how we will do better for our children, and that's we will always pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, and the next generation will be more successful. So it sounds like what you're saying is ours will be the first that is not going to be more successful.
Well, it's an open question because I think that there's a real danger that the millennial generation will not be as successful as our baby boomer parents were, precisely because I think that the boomers have made so many of the bad decisions I talk about in the book that have made it harder for the economy to thrive, harder for the people who are working in that economy, who increasingly are millennials, to thrive with it. And so, I think that that is an important aspect to think about when we have this discussion about generational fairness, because, one aspect of generational fairness on a very basic level is to just try not to break it so that the people who are coming after you can enjoy the same benefits and opportunities that you did.
Hmm.
And that really seems to be something that's been breaking down, over the past generation.
So I guess, is there anything that can be done? I mean, can we right the ship here as we see more millennials taking those leadership roles, being elected to public office, et cetera? Are they going to be able to sort of shift this and make it better for not only our generation, but the one coming after?
Well, I don't know what the answer to that is yet. And in fact, you'll notice if when you read the book that I tried to avoid giving any kind of simplistic bulleted point list of, if only Congress passes this law, that law, and the other law, it'll all be okay. Because I think that the story I'm telling is really a lot more complicated than that. And I think that first we just need to make sure that we're asking the right questions. But I think that, certainly millennials are looking for answers. I think that that is one reason that I think that millennials right now are drawn to politicians like Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren, who are so far outside of the traditional baby boomer policy mold. Millennials can tell that what we've been doing for the past generation hasn't worked. But I think that we also aren't really convinced about what the solutions might be. So, this is going to be a debate that's going to take more than one book to settle.
All right. Joseph Sternberg is the author of The Theft of a Decade: How the Baby Boomers Stole the Millennials' Economic Future. Joseph, thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me on.